Order.
Orders of the day. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Government Notice of Motion number 105.
Government Notice of Motion number 105, Mr. Bethlenfalvy.
Next, I'll recognize the Minister of Finance. President.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Premier, Premier Ford, that this House approves, in general, the budgetary policy of the government.
Mr. Bethlenfalvy has moved, that seconded by Mr. Ford, that this House approves in general the budgetary policy of the government. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Premier, our government, and every member of this legislature, I want to begin with a simple thank you. Thank you to the doctors. Thank you to the nurses. Thank you to the personal support workers and other frontline health care workers, the caring people of this Ontario. Thank you to every employee and business owner keeping our economy moving and local communities running. And thank you to the people of Ontario for following public health guidance and for every act of kindness, consideration, and patience that has made this tough time a little bit easier. Because, Mr. Speaker, when the story of this past year is written, it will be written of the story of these acts, big and small, that are remembered. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, this budget is there to make sure that we will finish the task we started a year ago, because after going through the storm for a whole year, we hope that finally we will arrive at the end of it.
Spirit, and it is the story of the 2021 budget. And, Mr. Speaker, this is our plan to finish the job we started 1 year ago. Because, Mr. Speaker, after a year in stormy seas, safe harbour is finally in sight. Hope is on the horizon. At community centres, doctors' offices, pharmacies and hospitals across our great province, Ontario's healthcare heroes are delivering vaccines that will help us get back to normal. That is what hope looks like, Mr. Speaker, but our difficult voyage is not over. Land is in sight, but waters remain troubled, as we are now in a race against time, vaccines versus variants. And the government's job, Mr. Speaker, to protect you, the people of Ontario, is not yet done. The
government's task is to protect Ontarians, and it is not yet over.
As the public has continued to unfold, as the pandemic has continued to unfold, people have been very clear that they expect us to focus on two vital priorities. First and foremost, they expect us to protect the people's health, your health. And second, they expect us to protect our economy. That is exactly what this budget does. Ontario's total response to COVID-19 is now $51 billion. And this next phase of Ontario's action plan makes good on the Premier's simple promise to the people: we will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Now, Mr. Speaker, Premier Ford has worked day and night to protect our province. His steadfast leadership has saved lives, and his focus on our health has been unrelenting. Thank you, Premier. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Ontario's action plan, protecting people's health and our economy, brings the government's total investment to protect people's health to $16.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, it starts with vaccines, and the scientists behind the COVID-19 vaccines achieved a scientific miracle, a human miracle. By developing safe, effective vaccines in record time, they have also managed to bottle hope in a tiny vial. Millions of tiny vials, in fact, that will eventually close one of the darkest chapters of our lifetime. The question that remains is, how long will it take? That's why our top priority is getting vaccines in arms, full stop. At this very moment, nurses, doctors and pharmacists are vaccinating the people of Ontario. And today, I'm announcing that Ontario is making more than $1 billion available for our province-wide vaccination plan. Mr. Speaker, the plan has 3 phases and activates every available health care resource. Nothing will prevent us from getting the job done. For instance, we are investing in a program to provide safe, accessible transportation for persons with disabilities and older adults with limited mobility to get to their vaccination appointment. And we are dedicating an additional $50 million, Mr. Speaker, to vaccination programs in Indigenous communities in which so many are at higher risk. Mr. Speaker, nobody will be left behind. To execute a rollout of this size, we have pulled together healthcare professionals, medical experts and frontline workers across the province, from truckers to move the vaccines, to frontline healthcare workers to administer them, to an army of volunteers to help make appointments, drive people to vaccination sites, or simply encourage a loved one to receive their shots. Everyone has a role to play. We are mobilizing Team Ontario. And, Mr. Speaker, there are many challenges ahead of us, but having spoken to so many people involved in this effort, I'm inspired by their determination and compassion. They are the fuel that drives the Ontario spirit, and I invite you to join me in applauding their effort. Now, Mr. Speaker, while vaccines are rolling out, continued action is needed to stop the spread. That requires more testing. Anyone who needs a test can get a test, and they can count on getting their results quickly. Well over 14 million tests have already been completed. But let me be clear, with vaccines on the horizon and the possibility of more restrictions being lifted, we need more tests, not less. That's how we can catch new outbreaks and identify the presence of new variants. And it's why we are ramping up our testing program to make it safer to re-engage with our workplaces, schools, businesses and communities. Our government is investing $2.3 billion more for testing and contact tracing in 21-22, bringing the total investment since the beginning of the pandemic to $3.7 billion. And, Mr. Speaker, rapid tests are a key part of our strategy. Going forward, we will provide around 385,000 rapid tests per week in long-term care, 118,000 in retirement homes, and 300,000 in essential workplaces like manufacturing, warehouses, construction, and food processing. This ambitious testing strategy continues to ease anxiety, make life safer, and ultimately save lives. And it's an important part of our plan to defeat the pandemic and help get life back to normal. And, Mr. Speaker, vaccines and testing help stop the spread, but when someone gets sick or requires care, a hospital bed must be available. One of our greatest fears since the beginning of COVID-19 has been running out of hospital space. Fortunately, we have prevented that from happening. To ensure every person who requires hospital care can have access to a bed, even during the worst of the pandemic, we have invested an additional $5.1 billion since the beginning of COVID-19. This has created more than 3,100 additional hospital beds, the equivalent of 6 new large community hospitals. Like every province, Ontario faces a punishing backlog of surgeries and other procedures. That's why our budget makes available more resources available to clear the backlog the pandemic has created. So we will be keeping operating rooms open late into the night because no patient should be left behind without the care they need. More of that care will be delivered in new, modern, and bigger and better hospitals. Today, we are accelerating our long-standing work with a more than $30 billion plan to build, expand, and improve hospitals across the province over the next 10 years. No government, Mr. Speaker, has committed to invest more in Ontario hospitals. Mr. Speaker, this includes an historic and overdue investment for the Peel region. Today, I am proud to announce we will support the hospital expansion and construction of a new wing at the William Osler Health Systems in Brampton. And I'd very much like to thank my colleagues, the member from Brampton West and Brampton South, for advocating for this project. Mr. Speaker, it is a priority for their constituents, it's a priority for patients, and it is a priority for our government. In addition, we are working with Trillium Health Partners on a major redevelopment and hospital expansion in Mississauga. And, Mr. Speaker, to expand a hospital in Etobicoke to meet patient needs in these fast-growing communities. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to announce today that we are supporting the planning of a new regional hospital in Windsor, Essex. And, Mr. Speaker, we are doubling capacity of the London Health Sciences Stem Cell Transplant Unit. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to announce we are building a new facility to provide care and treatment to 30,000 families with young patients in Chatham, Kent. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to announce we are investing in a new Children's Treatment Centre in Ottawa as part of the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. Mr. Speaker, these are investments that deliver on our commitment to build more hospital beds, to provide critical infrastructure to match the expertise of our healthcare workers, and to ensure patients receive the care they need when and where they need it. Mr. Speaker, protecting loved ones in long-term care is very important to all of us in this House. Mr. Speaker, while COVID-19 threatens us all, it is the residents and staff in long-term care homes who have suffered the most. The good news is this. Today, nearly every long-term care resident in Ontario has been fully immunized. Cases and deaths in long-term care homes have declined. This is, of course, positive news, but it's only a start. To protect our loved ones in long-term care from the deadly COVID-19 virus, Ontario is investing an additional $650 million this year to prevent the spread, increase staffing, and buy more supplies such as masks. That brings, Mr. Speaker, the total additional resources provided since the beginning of the pandemic to over $2 billion. Because, Mr. Speaker, what happened in long-term care homes during the pandemic exposed a tragedy decades in the making. I think we can all agree this tragedy was the result of years of neglect and underfunding in long-term care. But the inaction stops with us. It stops right here. The previous government took nearly 10 years to build 611 new beds across the province. Mr. Speaker, we are building 30,000 new beds. And with this budget, Ontario is investing an additional $933 million for a total of $2.6 billion to make good on that commitment. Mr. Speaker, we are also building 4 new long-term care homes on an accelerated basis. Shovels are already in the ground. and we are investing $246 million to improve living conditions in existing homes, including ensuring air conditioning for residents. And this will ensure our loved ones live in comfort with safety, dignity, and respect. But it's not just about beds, Mr. Speaker. It's also about the quality of care. Last November, we committed to ensuring residents receive an average 4 hours of direct care per day. Frankly, they deserved as much a long time ago. This is an ambitious commitment. It will make Ontario the leader in Canada. However, there are many hurdles to making it a reality, including a need to hire tens of thousands of new staff to provide the care, something that clearly cannot happen overnight. But we will clear these hurdles, Mr. Speaker, and that is why Ontario is investing $4.9 billion over 4 years to increase the average direct care to 4 hours a day. We will also hire more than 27,000 new positions, including personal support workers and nurses. And we are not waiting to act. We are investing over $121 million to support the accelerated training of almost 9,000 personal support workers. Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of the personal support workers that work day in, day out to protect us all. They sacrifice so much at personal risk in difficult conditions. They are frontline heroes and too often forgotten. We will always be there for Ontario's personal support workers. Mr. Speaker, while we improve long-term care in retirement homes, we are also making it easier for seniors to live in the homes they love, to live there longer. It's why we are investing $160 million in the Community Paramedicine Program to bring care and services to the homes of seniors in 33 communities. Mr. Speaker, in communities like Orangeville and Merrickville, Waterloo and Brant, York Region and Windsor. Mr. Speaker, there's also another area that I'd like to focus in on, and to reflect the true character of the Ontario people, their government must act with compassion. It's why better care for our seniors is such an important focus of our budget, and it drives our commitment to mental health and addictions treatment and care. Because, Mr. Speaker, mental health is health, period. This phrase is so simple, and yet it represents a monumental shift in our society's recognition that people with mental health and addiction challenges deserve access to the treatment and care they need. It has driven so many of our actions since taking office, including the Roadmap to Wellness, our $3.8 billion 10-year commitment to mental health addictions funding, providing more psychology treatment to patients, and the first Centre of Excellence for Mental Health in the province's history. We have a lot of work left to do. COVID-19 has only intensified the need for action. So to help the thousands of people struggling with mental health and addiction issues, our government is making record investments, including an additional $175 million in 2021-22 to provide more and better care for everyone who needs it, bringing our total investment this year to $525 million. And we are going to bring support directly to those who need it. That includes 4 new mobile mental health clinics to serve rural and underserved communities, and a new program to embed mental health workers in police call centres to ensure people in crisis get the right support. And, Mr. Speaker, investments to help our uniformed heroes, including veterans and OPP staff. To anybody tuning in today, please reach out to a family member or friend to check in, acknowledging the struggle of those dealing with mental health challenges, or ask for help if you need it. It's okay not to be okay. And know this, we will be there to support you. Mr. Speaker, mental health and addiction challenges are not the only challenges that have intensified during the pandemic. That may not be obvious. One that concerns me deeply is the alarming increase in domestic violence. Every child and every woman deserve to live in a home where they do not have to fear for their safety when they walk through the front door. I'm grateful to my colleague, the exceptional Associate Minister of Children and Women's Issues, Mr. Speaker, she has brought leadership and the perspectives of so many experts to end the travesty that is violence against women and children. So thank you, Minister. And Mr. Speaker, it starts with a statement of resolve. Domestic abusers should face severe criminal consequences. The only place for them is behind bars. While the federal government writes criminal laws and the justice system enforces them, our government has a role to play in providing more support to victims. And this budget does just that with new investments to expand support services. Mr. Speaker, we are investing an additional $18.2 million over 3 years to protect and support First Nations, Inuit and Métis women and girls who face higher rates of violence than others. And, Mr. Speaker, an $18.5 million to support victims of domestic violence and human trafficking survivors find and maintain safe housing. We remain committed to supporting victims of domestic violence, human trafficking, and other violent crimes. This is a government that will always stand up for victims, because every law-abiding citizen deserves to be protected. Mr. Speaker, our investments not only protect people from COVID-19, they also build a better health care system for tomorrow, so that in Ontario, people can always receive the care they need. Because without healthy people, we cannot have a healthy economy. And, Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the second pillar of our plan. Overwhelmingly, the people and employers of our province have done what it takes to protect each other from COVID-19, even when these sacrifices have impacted their livelihoods. We recognize these sacrifices, and today we are taking further steps to provide direct support to the families, workers and employers who have sacrificed so much. Ontario's action plan, Protecting People's Health and Our Economy, brings the government's total investment to protect Ontario's economy to $23.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, every parent in Ontario has faced new pressures due to COVID-19. For some, that includes financial challenges caused by the pandemic. For many, it includes new expenses to support virtual learning or childcare. And for all, it includes anxiety about their child's future in a world that will look different than it does today. Now, while our government can't make this pressure go away, we can provide a helping hand. So to put more money in parents' pockets, we are providing a third round of payments through the Ontario COVID-19 Child Benefit. This announcement today brings the total direct support we have provided families since March of 2020 to $1.8 billion. Mr. Speaker, the payment will be doubled to $400 per child and $500 per child for each child with special needs. And consider what that means for a family with 3 young children, including one with special needs. They will have received $2,600 through the Ontario COVID-19 Child Benefit. That is real and meaningful relief. It won't solve every problem, but it helps. And it's one of the simplest, quickest and most direct ways we can make a difference. Mr. Speaker, few pressures parents face are more significant than the cost of childcare. Nearly every economist I speak to says making childcare more affordable is one of the key ways to ensuring a robust recovery from COVID-19, not to mention a vital factor in creating the growth necessary for long-term prosperity. I also hear it directly from parents. Too many tell me the high cost of childcare will keep them out of the workplace. And this burden is not borne equally. Just as the virus hits different people with different levels of severity, so too does the economic impact of the pandemic. And it is abundantly clear women have been significantly impacted. While employment among men is currently down by 3.3%, It is down by nearly 5% for women. In large part, this is because more women have tended to work in the jobs most affected by the necessary public health measures and restrictions. And the challenges have been exacerbated by the high cost and lack of access to childcare spaces. Mr. Speaker, no one should be prevented from getting back to work because they can't afford childcare. So we are proposing a temporary 20% enhancement to the care tax credit for 2021. This would increase support from about $1,250 to $1,500 on average per family. In total, it would provide about $75 million in additional relief for over 300,000 families. Mr. Speaker, this is extra money back into families' pockets to cover expenses like childcare, after-school programs, even summer camp. We also need to ensure childcare is available to parents. That's why our government pledged to create 30,000 new childcare spaces, and I'm pleased to report that we are more than two-thirds of the way to meeting that pledge. With this new capacity, our enhanced care tax credit, and the third round of payments to parents, Ontario families will be stronger, and Mr. Speaker, strong families make a strong province. Mr. Speaker, we are also supporting students. COVID-19 has disrupted their routines and changed how they are taught. Mr. Speaker, young people have been among those disproportionately impacted by the economic impacts of the pandemic. So we are protecting students today, but also investing in their success for tomorrow. We have led the country with close to $1.7 billion to protect students and keep students safe, including $100 million to improve classroom ventilation. We will also invest $14 billion over the next 10 years to build and upgrade schools, like the first new school in Pickering in over 20 years, which will serve 536 students. It'll serve 536 students and create 73 licensed childcare spaces. And all told, we are investing $550 million, Mr. Speaker, in the 2021 school year to support 16,000 new learning spaces across 28 schools. And of course, Mr. Speaker, ensuring remote and online learning can be delivered for students has become vitally important during the pandemic, which is why we're investing $40 million to improve remote learning technology. This is an important step, but there is another factor that is holding our students back. Mr. Speaker, we heard from a principal during the second wave when the public health situation meant classes had to be 100% virtual. The principal said their rural school was ready to teach online, except most of their students didn't have a quality, reliable internet connection. In the province of Ontario, in the year 2021, that is simply unacceptable. We are going to fix it with the most ambitious investment in internet connectivity in Canadian history. To connect homes, businesses and schools to broadband, our government is supercharging our investment with another $2.8 billion, bringing the province's total investment to nearly $4 billion in 6 years. Mr. Speaker, just as railways and highways were being built 100 years ago to physically connect this vast province, our government will undertake this monumental province-building project to connect people virtually, so that no student ever falls behind because they don't have internet, so that no entrepreneur is ever held back from starting the business of their dreams, and so that no grandparent is ever cut off from their loved ones. And I look forward to holding a video conference with that school principal to thank her for her advocacy for her students. A video conference on a reliable internet connection delivered through this historic investment. Mr. Speaker, too many of our neighbours lost their jobs since this pandemic began. Workers in some industries, including hospitality, retail, tourism, have been more affected than others. So have women, youth, and racialized people. They lost their jobs through no fault of their own, but rather to a virus that has required unprecedented restrictions on our economy to keep each other safe. It simply is not fair. And these workers deserve our support getting back to work. For some, that may mean exploring opportunities in a new industry. And in many parts of the economy, employers are hiring, including in construction, manufacturing, and long-term care. But this often requires going back to school, which costs money at a time when their personal finances may have already been stretched to the limit. So to help workers with their training expenses, the government is proposing a new temporary Ontario Jobs Training Tax Credit for 2021. Mr. Speaker, it would provide up to $2,000 per recipient for 50% of eligible expenses. This is estimated to provide $260 million in support for about 230,000 people this year. Consider what that means for Hope, a 27-year-old who lost her job due to the pandemic. She decides to go back to school to start a new career. Say her tuition is $4,050. Hope will receive $2,000 from the Ontario Jobs Training Tax Credit, making retraining a more accessible option to consider. So, Mr. Speaker, we are building on this relief with more employment and trading support because we know it makes a difference. I remember hearing about a worker who had been laid off from a job in manufacturing, and he used our services to retrain. And, Mr. Speaker, he decided to become a personal support worker, turning a personal economic loss into an opportunity to care for people in his community. And, Mr. Speaker, we want to help more people like this worker. So we are making an investment of $614 million to provide workers with employment training support. And $117 million of that is specifically for people most affected, including women, youth, people with disabilities, racialized and Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, I want to point out Hope's story is one of many where her career could be in the skilled trades. As the Minister of Labour and Training and Skills Development never fails to point out, there are more jobs available in the skilled trades than qualified workers. These jobs are high-paying, rewarding opportunities to build a career and support a family. They also allow you to help build your community and your province. And with our government's plan to spend more than $145 billion over the next 10 years on infrastructure, including the largest subway expansion in Canadian history, making GO Transit a comprehensive all-day rapid transit network, bringing passenger rail service to the north, and historic investments in highways, there will be no shortage of opportunities to play a role in rebuilding Ontario. And, Mr. Speaker, to help more workers and students get into the skilled trades, our government is investing $288 million this year in the skilled trade strategy to help people find a career that they wouldn't trade. To help more workers like Hope. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the most significant inequities of the pandemic has been in the impact on small business owners and their employees who have faced significant restrictions. And for our government, it has been among the heaviest burdens that we bear. And although I know that burden is infinitely heavier for the small businesses affected, and that's why in January we announced the Ontario Small Business Support Grant for employers affected by the province-wide shutdown. Mr. Speaker, to date, about 100,000 eligible small businesses have already seen funds flow into their bank accounts. Businesses in communities from Sarnia to Sault Ste. Marie, from Kenora to Kitchener, from Brockville to Barrie. I've heard from someone who said this support is the difference between keeping the lights on and turning them off for good. So as we roll out the vaccines, we recognize small businesses are still struggling and will face additional expenses and more pressure as things get back to normal. So today, we are announcing a second payment to the Ontario Small Business Support Grant so that eligible small businesses will automatically receive a second payment in the amount equal to their first. Mr. Speaker, this will bring the estimated total support provided through this grant to $3.4 billion. And Mr. Speaker, in total, our government is providing small businesses $6.3 billion in relief in 2021, which includes lower electricity bills, lower taxes, and lower payroll costs. And consider what this means for a small retail store in Markham. They could receive 2 payments of $20,000 through the Ontario Small Business Grant, a $1,000 Ontario Main Street PPE grant, and $1,630 in property tax and energy cost rebates. Mr. Speaker, that's $42,630 in direct support. This protects jobs now and in the future. Mr. Speaker, people in the tourism, hospitality, culture, sports, and recreation industries have been particularly hard hit by the necessary public health restrictions. In fact, 140,000 tourism and hospitality jobs were lost between February of 2020 and February of 2021. Today, Ontario is investing an additional $400 million to support these employers, bringing our total support to more than $625 million since the pandemic began. And, Mr. Speaker, it will include the new Ontario Tourism and Hospitality Small Business Support Grant, targeted specifically at some of the hardest-hit businesses, including hotels, overnight summer camps, and amusement parks. And that will provide an estimated $100 million in one-time payments of between $10,000 and $20,000 to eligible small businesses. Because, Mr. Speaker, with these additional measures, we will ensure that Ontario remains a terrific place to discover. Mr. Speaker, while all of us have been affected by COVID-19, some have been affected more than others. Our government support is designed to ease the burden for those who have been carrying more of the load during this difficult year. As I've said, women in particular have been disproportionately affected, and it's clear we are experiencing a she-cession. It's why we are taking action to support affected workers and small business owners, improve access and affordability for childcare, and support survivors of increased domestic violence. And, Mr. Speaker, as a father of 2 wonderful daughters, a husband, a son, a grandson, the disproportionate impact on women is troubling to me on a personal level. That's why the Associate Minister responsible for children and women's issues and I will establish a task force to advise the government on how to address the unique and disproportionate economic barriers that women face. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, when we all have an opportunity, an equal opportunity, all of us do better. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize the critical leadership of strong, capable, brilliant women during this pandemic. People like Dr. Barbara Yaffe, who has advised our government. People like the Minister of Health, whose steady leadership we have counted on. Like the Minister of Long-Term Care, a medical doctor who has worked tirelessly to protect the most vulnerable. Like the Solicitor General, who has guided our emergency response. And, Mr. Speaker, like the Leader of the Opposition, who has played such an important role holding our government to account. Mr. Speaker, all of us are better for their leadership and contributions. We have made much progress, and yet we still have so much more to do. We must also do better for Indigenous and racialized people. Systemic racism is a reality, including here in Ontario. It is a reality we must change. A long overdue conversation on race is underway, but a conversation, however frank, is not enough. It is time for action. That is why we made a $60 million investment in the Black Youth Action Plan last fall. It is why we are investing $117 million in employment and training supports for those most affected by the pandemic. And it is why we are taking another step with the anti-racism and anti-hate grant, which will support community-based anti-racist initiatives. Mr. Speaker, hate spreads when allowed to fester. So let us all resolve to speak out against hatred when we see it, and work together to build a more inclusive province each and every day. And as we look beyond COVID-19, let us make it our shared goal that nobody is left behind. Truly sustainable growth must be inclusive growth. It must, Mr. Speaker, include everyone. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have outlined our action plan to beat COVID-19, to put it behind us, to get that job done. I will conclude with an update on our province's economic and fiscal situation. As a student of history, I cannot deliver that update without thinking of other challenging times in our challenging past. When Leslie Frost rose in the House to deliver his budget in 1945, perhaps in this very seat, he declared that the legislature was meeting in difficult days, that we had a difficult path ahead, that he was standing in a wartime legislature delivering a wartime budget. Mr. Speaker, thank God we're not in a world war, and yet the circumstances of today share some similarities to when Minister Frost stood in this place. The people of Ontario are united in a battle against a common enemy. The job is not done. The enemy is not yet defeated. And as the Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board, my job is to ensure we make every resource available to win our battle against the virus, and we have. Mr. Speaker, the Ontario government is projecting to spend $173 billion in 2021-22, and when you consider that the government spent $148.8 billion in 2018-2019, it's clear that we have spared no expense to defeat COVID-19. Of course, as it has for governments around the world, this spending has resulted in record deficits. We project the deficit will be $33.1 billion in 2021-22. And while this is neither sustainable nor desirable forever, I'm absolutely, unequivocally convinced it is necessary to get through the pandemic and to recover stronger. And in fact, I believe the price of inaction would be much, much higher in terms of lost lives, jobs, and prosperity. Because, as I've said, you cannot have a healthy economy without healthy people. Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we once again outlined 3 economic and fiscal scenarios to be as transparent as possible about the uncertainty that remains in our global economy and the risk to our province's finances. We will continue to be transparent with regular updates as the situation continues to evolve. There is no doubt that our return to fiscal sustainability will take many, many years. Some would tell us that tax hikes or cuts to public services are the only way to get there. They are wrong. The other path is to get Ontario growing again. And I am convinced that along with a modern government and a federal partner who pays their fair share, economic growth is the key to our fiscal recovery. And that growth will create jobs, provide revenues to support critical public services, and ensure a sustainable financial position. Since 2018, we have strengthened the foundation of our province's economy. Later this year, our government will release our plan to strengthen the conditions for long-term economic growth. We are already taking important steps today, positioning Ontario to be a leader in electric vehicle manufacturing, creating Invest Ontario and the $400 million Invest Ontario Fund, making the province a top-tier destination for investment, and proposing to double the Regional Opportunities Investment Tax Credit to encourage growth in regions that have fallen behind, which all builds on the actions we took last November to remove barriers to growth that would have otherwise held Ontario back from a strong economy and recovery. We've done that by reducing high electricity rates, by removing taxes on jobs and lowering unfair high business education property taxes. So while we can create the conditions, it will be the people and employers who create the actual growth. Which brings me, Mr. Speaker, back to the Ontario spirit. When the people of this province put their minds to something, they make it happen. So today, I'm putting the world on notice. Don't bet against the people of Ontario. We will succeed. We have chosen growth, and as sure as I'm standing here today right beside the Premier and all my colleagues and our government, we will grow stronger than ever. Because when Leslie Frost stood in this place in 1945, he said that victory is assured if we adhere to our determination to win. Mr. Speaker, we are going to defeat this pandemic because I know the province of this people. I know that they are determined to win. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, as we face down this historic challenge, there's no place I'd rather be. Like so many others in this province, my family's story is an immigrant story. Both of my parents left Hungary as refugees because of World War II. It was here in Ontario that they met, married, they built a life in Canada and raised a family. And today, their son has the privilege to serve as the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, that is the Ontario story. Mr. Speaker, that is the Ontario dream. And we must all work to ensure that it can be the Ontario story for every person in this province, that it can be everybody's dream. And occasionally I step back during a conversation with a constituent and I reflect on how likely it is that they have a story or dream similar to mine, of families from around the world that chose to settle here. Those choices mean we get to pull from the very best of the entire world. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that the 14.7 million people of Ontario can accomplish anything when we work towards a common goal. Our people's hard work, ingenuity and drive for better, stronger families and communities will set us on a path that restores Ontario's place as the economic engine of this country. Mr. Speaker, the Premier calls it the Ontario spirit. The Ontario spirit is hard work and sacrifice, kindness and respect. Doing what's right, not what's easy. And it has not been, and it won't be a straight path to the finish line, but the Ontario spirit will get us through COVID-19, and when that time comes, the Ontario spirit will unleash growth like anything we've seen in this province ever before. Mr. Speaker, hope is on the horizon. The safe harbour is not far away, and until we reach those shores, we will maintain our relentless focus on protecting people's health and economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the member for London West.
Thank you, Speaker. I move the adjournment of the debate.
Member for London West is moving the adjournment of the debate. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried. I'll ask the Minister of Finance if he wishes to present a bill at this time.
Yes.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to implement budget measures and to enact and amend various statutes, and that now be read for the first time.
Bethlyn Falvey has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to enact and amend various statutes, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled an act to implement budget measures and to enact and amend various statutes. First reading of the bill, première lecture du projet de loi.
Does the minister wish to give a brief explanation of his bill? I think he already has. Thank you. Thank you. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adjournment of the House.
Mr. Callander is moving the adjournment of the House. It's the pleasure of the House that the motion carry. Carried. This House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m.
This is the Ontario Parliament Television Network.
you.